All right, I have just a little bit after 1:30. NRC staff, is there anyone that we need to be waiting for? Or are we ready to proceed? Okay, Andrew, how about from your side? Do you have everyone you need?
Yeah, I think we have everyone, Manny. We're ready when you are.
Let's get started. 1 second. Okay, good afternoon. My name is Manny Sayok. I am the project manager in the licensing and regulatory infrastructure branch at the NRC, responsible for this meeting. Today's observation virtual pre-application public meeting is to discuss SMR-160 Holtec's new and spent fuel management program. Members of the public are invited to observe the business portion of the meeting and to make comments on the topic discussed or ask questions of the staff near the end of the meeting. This is a pre-application meeting. Pre-application engagements, including this meeting, provide an opportunity for the NRC staff to engage in early discussions with a prospective applicant to offer licensing guidance and to identify potential licensing issues early in the licensing process. No decisions or commitments are anticipated during the pre-application meeting. The NRC has not received an application for the from the SMR-160 design and is not evaluating any final design information. Before we begin with opening remarks and introductions, a few reminders. Please put your microphone on mute if you're not speaking. Please state your name and organization before asking a question or making a comment. And please only use the meeting chat for logistics information. Please do not provide your comment in the chat. This is entirely a virtual meeting. I believe all the NRC staff also are joined virtually. So for introductions, what I'll do is I'll just do my best to do a roll call and then call on if I missed anybody from the staff. So myself, Manny Sayok. I have Angela Stubbs, Bernie White, Carolyn Baron, Greg Cranston, India Banks, John Lenning, Peyton Dowd, Rebecca Patton, Brian Nolan, Shanlai Liu, and Jian Lee. Did I miss anyone from the staff? No? Okay. All right. Andrew, how about you kick off the introductions from the Holtec side, please?
Thanks, Manny. I'll go around the room here a little bit too, just because I think there's a lot of additional folks that we would have normally in our SMR pre-application meetings for Holtec. But I'm Andrew Brenner. I'm the Director of Licensing for the SMR project. I'll start over.
I'm Ed Gallagher. I'm the SMR Operations Engineer.
Hi, Mike Patesta, one of the Operations Managers.
Dave Lewis, Senior Director of Operations.
Matt Block, Program Manager for Dry Storage.
And then we have a couple other people on the line. I guess we can start with Clark.
Hey, this is Clark Charleff. I'm with SMR in the licensing group as well.
Deepu.
Yeah, Deepu Majumdar, Vice President, Engineering Analysis.
Faisal.
Hello, Faisal Ode, Nuclear Engineering Manager for SMR-160.
Justin.
Yeah, Justin Hawkins, SMR Managing Director.
Kim,
Yeah, Kim Manzione. I'm the Director of Licensing for Holtec's cask side.
and then Stefan.
Yeah, this is Stefan Anton, Senior VP of Engineering at Holtec.
And I believe that's everybody for us. If I missed anyone, apologize.
Was on there. Burr.
Hi, good
Oh, sorry.
afternoon. Abrar Mohammed, manager of the thermal hydraulics team at Holtec.
Thanks, Dave.
This is Greg Cranston. Just a quickie. Andrew, could you also send us an email with the names of the people that are participating from Holtec, please?
Yeah, I can do that, Greg.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Greg. Okay, so if that's everyone, then we will go ahead and open up with our open portion for this pre-application public meeting. Andrew, is there someone that you would like to call on to present, and do they want to drive their own slides?
Sure. We can drive. Just give us a second to pull them up.
Okay.
So just trying to open it up. Just be another second.
Okay, no worries.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. This is Mike Protesto speaking from Holtec Operations Team. So today we'll be meeting on the new and spent fuel management program for the SMR plant. This is the non-proprietary version. So we've already gone over introductions for both NRC and Holtec staff. We'll cover purpose and outcome of today's meeting, cover some plant design attributes, then go into the new fuel storage and refueling approach, then to the spent fuel management approach before I open forum. So we'll dive right in. So purpose of today's meeting is to provide a high-level overview of the fuel management program for both new and spent fuel assemblies to the NRC, with the intended outcome to obtain feedback from the staff on the licensing assumptions made in the intended program discussed. And we have some questions about some of the key features that we think as part of our design as of right now. And just as a note, I know we've informed the NRC staff a lot of the numbers associated with the batch sizes and spent fuel pool assemblies are on the SMR-160 design. We are going through some updates on the core and spent fuel pool design numbers. However, the intended approach is still the same. So the discussion here is still valuable for us as we develop our plan. Just some of those numbers might increase with our new design. All right. So plant design attributes. So SMR plant, we use the traditional PWR fuel, the 17x17 tube assemblies that are 12-foot active fuel length nominally. Core contains about 57 fuel assemblies and a spent fuel pool with 150 cells, and that's located in the containment structure. So one of the unique design considerations is having the core, all the primary systems, as well as the spent fuel pool within the containment structure itself. There is a dry new fuel storage rack, and that's in the radiologically controlled area of the RAB for the receipt, inspections, and storage of the new fuel before moving it into containment. And that's currently sized for 44 assemblies. Intention would be to use a multi-purpose canister, the MPC 37 and high track combo. That's generally licensed for the storage, transport of spent fuel pool assemblies, to use that as a means of bringing in some of the new fuel into containment, and then use that as license for our spent fuel storage. RCA is equipped with a rail system for a low profile transporter, and that will be used to transfer in the MPC into and out of containment. And then there's a designated location within the spent fuel pool itself in order to place the MPC in the high track. Refueling cycle nominally consists of about 19 new fuel assemblies for our batch size for our core reload. Spent fuel pool dry cast campaigns will be based on our numbers, intended only to be performed once we could fill an entire MPC 37 instead of doing half or partial loads of assemblies. And that is just done in our assumption to help push out or have a critical spent fuel pool size for our containment. And then one of the attributes for our design as shown here, that all fuel moves between the core, the spent fuel pool, and the high track MPC 37 can only be done while the reactor cavity is flooded. So when we flood for refueling, that's when we'll have enough water to perform all the spent fuel pool manipulations and the core offload and reload.
We got a couple questions here, Mike.
Oh, there are. Okay, sorry. Yeah, if there are questions, I can't see them, so if somebody could assist.
And this is Kent Wood, NRR, SRXP, SNFB. I got a couple questions on this slide here. So the spent fuel pool is inside containment? Does that mean?
Correct.
Okay. Is it accessible during operation, or is it accessible during operation at all?
No, it would not be accessible during power operation. That's correct.
Okay. And could you show me exactly on this picture here where the reactor cavity is?
Sure. So the reactor cavity would be this entire section here. So the reactor head would come off, and then we would flood up to pretty much the top of this floor, with this level being the refueling floor.
Okay. I'm taking some notes here. Just give me a second.
Sure.
What are these blue columns there on either side?
The columns here,
Yes.
that is the annular reservoir, so that will be our ultimate heat sink.
So they're not involved in this at all.
No.
Yeah, it's outside the containment structure.
Yeah.
Clarification.
Correct. Yeah. So the containment structure is kind of this straight line up through here with this dome section, and then surrounding the containment structure is an annular reservoir, and then our containment enclosure structure. And then this helps provide some of the passive heat removal for our long-term DBA analysis.
Okay. And you said that the MPC is licensed, part 71, 72?
So the MPC, and if anybody else wants to drive it, it's currently licensed in order to transport and store spent fuel assemblies for long-term storage.
Our intent would be to license it under Part 50 for handling fresh fuel. So I don't know if Ken or Stefan would comment.
That's on the next slide.
That's on the next slide to talk about. So we'll come to that step around the licensing.
Okay.
Okay, Zion, you have a question?
Yeah.
Zion?
Yes. Hi, this is Ian Lee from ESS NRR. And my question is, for the MP37, you have a variety of a version. Which one are you using or plan to use? Or the one with Burnham credit or without? That's something not very clear to us.
Do we use burnable credit or not?
Yeah, we'll use the our standard MPC 37 that we have within our license. The height may change a little bit based off of fuel heights, but it'll be the standard MPC 37 that we
I guess that's not my question. My question is which version of MPC 37 you're using, the one taking burnout credit or the one without?
I don't think that level of detail was answered. We can take a look at it and get back to you if you want to know the exact model detail of the MPC 37. Right now, we're keeping it generic, but I understand that there are different models.
It's not. This is Stefan Anton. I think we haven't decided that yet. It's really the same model, but it's the question how you do the analysis, whether you take burn-up credit or whether you take a soluble boron credit. I personally would think that we would end up with burn-up credit, but it's a little bit too early to make that decision.
Well, the reason I asked you this question is really could potentially impact your choice. I think you guys really want to get early feedback from the staff. This could be a concern. And then if you're using this MPC as a fresh fuel holder or transporter, and then you potentially have two reactors side by side in a containment, kind of a system. So that would be something the regulation, we haven't really need to think about that as well.
Okay, we appreciate the comment.
You understand what I'm getting, right?
I think we understand. Yep.
Okay, yeah, this is the high level. We're not trying to drill you how much burn-up credit you're taking or how much silver boron you're taking. It's just a conceptually high level. Are you taking this or not? Yeah, what a version of the MPC it's just for your consideration. You don't have to answer it now,
Yep, we understand that. Thanks, Dion.
Right.
Thank you. Angelo, do you have a question?
Yes, this is Angelo Stubbs from Plant Systems. You indicated that there's a split that in the split fuel pool, there's a designated location for placing the MPC 37. Can you show where that location would be approximately on the diagram? Is there
coming up to a slide that'll show that here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
I think I'll be here on this one, but it should be. There is a location in the spent fuel pool designated.
It's coming up, I'll wait and see.
All right, I'll move on to the next slide and see no more questions. Okay, for our new fuel handling process. So new fuel will be transported into the radiologically controlled area of the reactor auxiliary building, or RAB, via the truck entrance as normally you would through a fuel handling building. And we would expect these receipts to be within not only 2 months before the refueling outage. So on this drawing, our truck entrance would come in here. We have crane capacity in this area along the north with the new fuel storage vault on this northern wall as well. So we'd be able to up-hoist, inspect, and then store the new fuel as it's delivered. So for refueling the new fuel assemblies, as we said, nominally 19 off the SMR-160 will be transferred to an NPC and then transported via a low profile transporter on the guided rails into containment. So part of that rail system is shown here. And this would be the containment equipment hatch to bring the fuel inside the containment structure. The MPC will be filled with borated water before lowering it into the spent fuel pool. That's just to help mitigate any of the onrush of the water while putting it into the spent fuel pool and the water dissipation for putting the whole cask in the pool. New fuel will then either be kept in the MPC until core reload or moved to the spent fuel pool rack. And then this would allow for loading spent fuel into the MPC during the core offload time. And we'll get into that a little bit more later. There's a question. Oh, there's a question. Okay. Ken?
Yeah, can you go back up to that slide?
Sure.
Now, this schematic of the level here, is that the refueling floor, equivalent to the refueling floor?
So this is all within the reactor auxiliary building. So the actual refueling floor. So the refueling floor, what we normally call that, will be inside containment, where the spent fuel pool and the reactor are.
Same elevation, trade level 0.
Correct. Yeah, same elevation. That is correct. Oh, okay. Sorry, misunderstood your question.
Right, well, I probably didn't ask it correctly then. So where will the MPC 37 and LPT be stored?
Like, want to go to slide 9? Let's go to slide 9, Mike. Let's jump to slide 9.
Sure, that's proprietary.
Is that okay? That's proprietary. Yeah, well, maybe perhaps we'll wait for a proprietary slide. We have all detail that will show that level of detail.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so all right, thank you.
Go ahead, John.
Okay. All right, so we'll, John?
Yeah, thank you. Just one quick question here. Does each unit at a site, would it have its own new fuel vault, or is that something that could be shared among different units at a site?
The intention now, as long as the storage capacity is sufficient for the 2 units, it could be in one central location.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further questions, I'll move on. So the main questions that we have based off our new fuel handling center around kind of these 2 points. So are there any challenges foreseen using an MPC, which is normally licensed under Part 72 and 70 for the spent fuel storage and transport for new fuel transportation into the containment?
Go ahead, Ken.
Yes, okay.
Sorry, I'm clicking the wrong buttons here. You guys know about the wet canister transfer or shield transfer canister that Indian Point did, that Holtec did the technical work for?
Yes.
Yes.
Right. So, that was a while ago. I think it was 2000. It was 2009 when Indian Point submitted that LAR. There was a lot of work done there, and I see these as being very similar as far as a regulatory perspective. There are no specific, there are certain regulations that would apply, GDCs, 5068, of course, and some, some others. But there's no particular regulation that will cover using an MPC to move. There's no explicit regulation. So we'll probably have to do something like we did for the wet transfer canister, and that is to use the same kind of aspects and looks. And you'll probably get the, have to answer the same type of questions that they had. Some of those questions may not apply because you're not going outside, you're not going down the, taking it down the road and back up. move it from one unit to the next, spent fuel pool, but you are moving it. It's a unique item. And then when you want to move the spent fuel back, that sounds like a unique aspect as well. I doubt that the MPC is licensed to be transporting fuel while it's full of water.
It is.
It is?
Yeah, that's the standard approach to get to get it out of the spent fuel pool. So that part should be covered by our standard Part 72 operations. But for the new fuel, getting the new fuel in, we understand that has to be done under Part 50, and we will look at it again very closely at the STC.
Yeah. So, or would you start loading it then? Will that then not? That will be all a Part 72 function when you're loading it for disposal, for storage, when you're loading the spent fuel into it?
Correct.
Yep, that's right.
So we basically, at some point in time, we have to mentally switch the MPC from Part 50 to Part 72. At that point in time, it's empty.
Right. Okay. Well, yeah. All right. And then, is it licensed in Part 72 for this repeated use? Well, I mean, I'm not sure, but it looks like that, like once you load it for disposal, then you're going to get a new one?
No, once you load it for disposal, it will be closed, and it will then be welded. So there is no repeated use in that respect. There might be a repeated use for the to get it under Part 50 into the spent fuel pool, because it might not be that it's used directly for to get spent fuel out. It might be only used for loading in a outage, and there's no spent fuel coming out. So that will be something that would have to be done potentially more than once with a single MPC.
Well, you're going to have to use it, like at least it's going to make 2 trips to load the core, the initial core.
Yeah.
And then it's going to make 2 trips at the end of cycle 1 and cycle. It's going to make a trip at least 1 trip during cycle 1, at the end of cycle 1, and at the end of cycle 2.
Yep. And maybe even cycle 3. So at some point in time, you then start to take stuff out, but that it might take a while. Yeah.
Yeah. So here, I guess what I'm getting at here is that I don't know. There's going to be questions. There's the potential for questions concerning whether or not these cycles or fatigue, how it affects the MPC 37.
Okay.
So these are cycles that it's not licensed to experience today.
It's currently already licensed for spent fuel for transportation. I think the load on that with drop accidents and things like this will be much larger. So, but we understand the question. I think we will be able to address that.
Yeah. Well, this is a little different because you're not going to be
we're not welding it. Yep.
You're not welding it. You're moving it back and forth, loading it and unloading it several times.
Yep.
And so, it behooves you to answer it ahead of time as to what impact that, because that's probably wasn't considered that it'd be loaded multiple times and lifted, multiple times.
We will look at that. Yep. We understand the question.
Yeah, that's a good point, Ken. And that is something we'll have to look into. To point that, so it will only be used for those first 3 refueling cycles to only transport fresh fuel in. There wouldn't be a need to remove any of the spent fuel out. So just be used majorly as a transport into containment and then removed empty from the spent fuel pool for those first 3 cycles.
Yeah, and then it's going to have to be. I mean, we'll get to the other part later. And then you've got here. So I've got more questions about the next comment. You want to say it first, then I'll ask them.
We could ask if Zion, if your question revolves around the first one.
John, do you have a question?
Yes, I think it's rather, I think Kent covers well. It's just an additional comment. You may have to consider potential, kind of fatigue of using your high track. This kind of thing was really not considered in the initial transport storage system design. Yeah, and the transportation, yeah, and so yeah, it's just a comment.
All right,
Yep.
thank you.
Thank you. Yep.
Thank you.
Kent, this is Manny. For my record purposes, can you provide a little more details? You mentioned that wet canister application for Indian Point. What application was that?
What application was that?
Right. What was it for?
What was it for? It was, unfortunately, I don't have the ML number for their submittal.
I can share some thought on that. And at that time it was really a kind of for units spent fuel movement, because I think unit 3 doesn't have the crane capacity. Holtec design a smaller one, and then which can move. I think it's only 12 fuel assembly per canister, or 16. I take
12.
it back.
It was 12.
12.
It was
12.
12.
It's 12. Okay, so you're moving that from unit 2 or 3 to 1, or 1 to 3. I think 3 to 1, right?
3 to 2.
3 to 2. Okay, yeah, I don't remember but then. So yeah, that's what's the purpose. Only move the fuel between the spent fuel between the units. It's not not for any refueling or any other purpose.
All right, this is Kent. I do have the ML number for the original Indian Point submittal. It's if you take this down, it's I mean there are lots of more documents associated with this event, but their initial submittal is Adam's number is ML 1029105111.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and that was their initial submittal, and there were supplements and RAI responses and all lots of more documents that are ML numbers, but that is the start.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
And Angela, looks like you have a question.
I think the NRC is good for now.
Okay. Thank you all for that feedback. Move on to the next question then, and we've been talking about all this, and so this is assuming that the borated water will be added to the MPC inside containment. So after it's moved from the RAB into containment, right before it's lifted into the spent fuel pool, would a temporary lid be necessary for transportation from the RAB to containment? Yes, Ken?
Well, so my question to that is, why wouldn't a lid be needed from the moment of it's loaded, before it even gets into containment?
Oh, we want to backfill it. I think our idea was to backfill it before we put it in the pool, so you didn't have that extra transient on the fuel in the pool itself.
Okay, so I mean, I don't have an answer for this, except for maybe, probably, I don't know whether or not you need a lid. Whether or not, like I said, I don't know of any explicit regulation that deals with this, because this is part 50. It doesn't really anticipate we don't have this. Would you need a lid on it? Would you need a lid to move it with fuel, lift it with fuel in it from part 72?
Yes.
Yes.
From a shielding perspective, you would
Yeah.
want a lid. The other aspect is just prevention of foreign material. As you get from the new fuel vault into containment,
Yeah.
it'd be better to have the lid than
That's right.
risk foreign material.
That's good, Kevin.
Canister.
But interesting on your perspective, if it's required regulatory wise, I think that's why the question was asked. It's a really unique situation.
Yep.
Well, I mean, I don't know, but, I think when we did the, like the Indian Point work, we applied a lot of the requirements that we would get used on transportation because we didn't have explicit things in, like in 50, but we would look to the part 72, 70 regulations for, okay, we have a GDC that says protect the fuel, but, how do you do that? And I think we used a lot of the regulations from, like this more specific regulations. So that's the reason why I go back and you can probably get a better answer for that. But my question is that, this thing is going to have to meet 5068 from the moment you put a fuel assembly in it.
Yes.
Right. So that means is that after you put a fuel assembly in it, you're going to have to, ensure that, it meets, this is essentially it's, at this point, it will be a mobile new fuel storage vault.
Yes, we understand that.
And so it's going to have to meet those criteria, like those regulatory requirements.
Yep.
So, that's the reason why I was asking if you're going to, why we wouldn't be a lid on it to begin with. But there's several different ways to meet the regulatory requirements, right, Anton?
Yep.
And so that's up to you guys to choose how. But it's going to have it's got an FME concern, the entire time, not just when it's in containment, not just when it's got borated water.
Yes.
You would probably be a good idea, if you put some sort of lid on it. Once again, whether this is that you don't splash water out of it.
Yeah,
I think the people that are moving the crane.
Yeah, I think from a criticality perspective, I think we're pretty clear. I think there's more a question from an operational and protection of the fuel perspective. From my perspective, I haven't looked at this. I looked at it from a criticality perspective, and I say I think I know what I need to do. I have to meet the 5068, the criticality requirement. In any time there is any fuel in there, and it's clear to us what we need to do there.
Yeah, as far as an operational thing, it's like I would think you would need to apply the same kind of rules that you would apply when you're moving a cask. When you were trying to load it and move it out of the pool with water on it. Do you have to have a lid because you don't want that water sloshing out onto the floor?
Yeah, Ken, I think the intent here is that the MPC would not be filled with water until it enters into containment. So that's why we're asking the question here.
So it would be transported via the LPT dry still with the fresh fuel inside. And I believe, so we knew that we would need some type of lid for FME purposes, but I think your comment on, really the intent of this question is looking for the regulations of kind of best practice to fall under. So 5068 for how robust that lid needs to be. If it needs to be something that is kind of just bolted down on the side and that's a contained lid for purposes, or if it needs to have a more robust, secure measure while transporting fuel on an LPT.
Well, this is kind of if you're just worried about FME, then you can probably almost put a sheet of plywood over it.
Yeah, some Herculate.
Yeah, it's something so that you can something doesn't fall off the rafters or it doesn't get dust or whatever in it. But then when it can be a different thing is because then you're going to fill it while it's on the LPT, right, with borated water. That's what the plan is, right?
Yeah.
And then you're gonna have to pick it up off the LPT and put it into the spent fuel pool.
That's right.
And my that could might need a different lid. or the same lid but does a different purpose? Because, you know, I don't know of a particular regulatory requirement that would require a lid other than, you know, could you possibly, you know, splash water out of it or dump water out of it onto the floor somewhere while it's being lifted or moved?
Yeah, that's a good comment. Here, we'll have to ensure that while it's being lifted over the pool, it's not gonna lose any of its own water.
Well, I mean, not just over the pool, but the moment it you know, he's lifted off the high track. You know, I don't know whether this thing, you know, how full is full, how much, you know, freeboard you're going to have before it would slosh over the side if you pick it up. You know, and, you know, moving anything, walking around the room, you know, like if I walk over to my refrigerator, came back from my refrigerator with a glass full of water, you know, I have to, you know, like just the motion of moving it could cause it to slosh over the sides. But it's too full. So, I mean, it's not just over the spent fuel pool, but like as soon as you lift it up off the high track, the LPT.
Yeah, I think we can make sure that nothing happens there. It's really just the operation that we do with the spent fuel just in the other direction. And if spent fuel is in there, there is a lid on there, but it's at that point in time it's not secured yet. And so, but I think we can use the experience from that to make sure that nothing happens.
Okay.
Yeah, you guys got experience moving these things, and so.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, I appreciate your comment, Ken. Mike, why don't we just move on?
All right, thank you. And we'll go on to the next section, should be the spent fuel. So for the refueling approach overview of once the canister enters into containment. So for the simplified sequence, new fuel will be brought in, as we just discussed, via the MPC 37, via the LPT. Will be filled with the borated water and then submerged into the spent fuel pool. From there, the whole core would be discharged to spent fuel pool racks. And then for the reload, 2/3 approximately will come from used fuel from the previous cycle, with a third that we had just brought in as a new fuel. And then nominally after 2 cycles, depending on the heat load and the cask loading, we'd use the MPC 37 to then remove the spent fuel pool and perform the dry cask operations as every other normal PWR. So comparisons between us, so there's no fuel transfer canal or separate in containment rack. So that's the benefit from the spent fuel in containment. You can move the fuel directly from the core to the spent fuel pool and vice versa. We'll have the conventional fuel bridge with the additional attachments needed to perform other evolutions such as CRDM swaps. And then our site will have the integrated high storm UMAX dry fuel storage system and IFSP pad on site. So for the outage evolution, it's assumed that the dry cask campaigns are performed as previously mentioned once we could fill a complete MPC. So we weren't looking at partial MPC loads, and then that just helps our spent fuel inventory if we don't have to wait for full 37 assemblies. In the case was based around the nominal 19 refueling strategy and the expected required decay time for MPC limits. So it's understood that additional cells will be needed for any leaking fuel potentials, the X-core instrumentations, filters, and et cetera that build up over the life of the plant. To optimize critical path for the dry cask storage operations during a defueled window, while the space permits in the spent fuel pool, the new fuel assemblies would be transferred from the MPC to the spent fuel pool rack, and the full core is offloaded to the spent fuel pool. So moving New fuel to the spent fuel pool rack then just requires those additional spaces. An alternate solution would be to maintain that new fuel in the MPC until the core reload's performed. So the new fuel never goes to the spent fuel pool rack, kind of using the MPC as a rack itself while it's in the spent fuel pool during a refueling outage. That way that kind of lowers our spent fuel pool inventory, provide more locations for us. And then the dry cask operations will then have to just be performed after the core is reloaded, since there won't be space in the MPC to load all the spent fuel. And that's just, outage critical path timeline impacts.
That's the question from
question?
Yeah, this is Sean Lailu from the Reactor System Branch in NRR. Just a quick question regarding your decay heat removal system. From the previous presentation, it was mentioned that for accident mitigation, this design has a passive decay heat removal system. So but during normal fuel shuffling, and then when you open the cavity or flood the cavity, do you have a separate active DHR system?
That's correct. So we have our spent fuel pool cooling system, the normal system for whenever there's spent fuel in a spent fuel pool. That system will be in continuous operation, and our residual heat removal system. So similar to, cooling down the plant after shutdown to remove the decay heat from the core. And then the spent fuel pool does have the capability to continue the decay heat removal for the core offload to the spent fuel pool rack, with addition as RHR being a backup to that system, since it is all one cavity.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that is the safety related heat removal would allow the pool to heat up and boil up while maintaining acceptable water level in the spent fuel pool. That's only if, those active systems that we have that are not in safety were to fail.
Correct. Yeah, we have the passive cooling systems and safety-related makeup tanks inside containment to maintain that water level. And we will just, as Andrew said, rely on kind of full boiling and makeup to maintain sufficient water height margin.
Thank you. Thanks.
This is Greg Cranston. When you put the MPCs in the spent fuel pool area, are they somehow anchored down or whatever in case you have a seismic event?
Yes, they do have a stand in which they would be fitted into, and I know the seismic calculations would be performed on that location and spacing between that and the spent fuel pool rack.
Similar to all the plants there, to prevent from rocking, right? We have the same ring in there to prevent it from rocking.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, this is Angelo Stubbs. I couldn't get off of mute before, but talking about the transportation and the movement, your design actually has a spent fuel pool inside containment, and you're handling heavy loads near other equipment other than just spent fuel pool. So, a comment is a lot of, you have to give considerations for safe load paths in terms of getting it in, putting it in place, and making whatever changes, putting a lid on, taking the lid off and setting it down in the pool. And the second point is your fuel handling. Everything has to be within range of your fuel handling equipment, because you're talking about taking fuel directly out of the core and putting it in either the spent fuel pool or that cask. So just a comment that there may be some challenges in terms of manipulating the cask where it needs to be, because you're not in an environment you're normally in when you're handling the heavy loads with the casks.
Yeah, good comments, Angela. It's been back to the safe load path. That's been an early consideration for our design. We do have a single failure-proof NOG1 crane in our design, working with the crane vendors, evaluating those lists, including the maximum weighted lifts and those safe travel paths. So the MPC move is a clear safety consideration for that load path. We believe we have that under advisement to exactly how we would do that and do that safely. Your second one, we certainly are looking at refueling machine reach to make sure we can make all these moves. So that's certainly a consideration we're looking at right now, working with our potential fuel handling vendors, and we're doing actually some modeling now to make sure we can indeed do that.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
It's Kent Wood again. The other question I had is that while this cask is, the MPC is in the spent fuel pool, with fuel in it, it is essentially a temporary in containment storage rack, right? And but because of its it being an MPC, it's not subject to flow from the water in the spent fuel pool and mixing and cooling, is it?
No, it would be just the same as any
loading operation. It'll be similar to other loading operation. I think Matt's in the room. We've done a lot of loading. It would be as similar to a loading operation when the pool is flooded and we're loading that canister.
Right.
I mean, you are cooling that pool. You are certainly getting heat out of an NPC, and you have circulation and a natural circulation that's occurring in that pool that's credited to maintain that pool, that fuel in that condition, right? Because that's the cooling mechanism until we close the lid, pull it, drain it, dry it, and dehydrate it, right? Until get it to safe condition.
Correct. The current licensing and analysis for dry storage is that it's considered part of the spent fuel pool environment until the lid goes on.
Okay, so you're crediting the heat from the spent fuel to provide that, natural cooling or circulation?
Yes. Yep.
Well, I mean, so the thing is I'm concerned about here is what's the soluble boron content you put in it to start with, and then whether or not you can have boron stratification within the cask or the MPC itself while it's in the spent fuel pool. If it's going to be there for an hour, probably not. It's going to be in there for a week, maybe.
We can, we understand the comment. We can review and compare to what industry practices and make sure that that's considered.
Yeah. Keep in mind is when it's new fuel, there will be no decay heat driving circulation.
That's right. Yep.
So, I mean, that's just, one of the comments I want to have is, so you have, it's not mentioned here, but we're allowed a lot of details. So how do you get the fuel from the pool to the reactor?
It would be using a manipulator crane on a refueling bridge.
Typical PWR refueling platform, normal practices.
So you have a fairly, recognizable, refueling machine that will move the fuel, pick up the fuel out of the storage cells in the pool and move it into the reactor, and then set it down in the reactor cavity, reactor core.
Correct. Yeah. So instead of going from the outlet or the transfer car elevator, and just be going from the spent fuel pool rack itself.
Would it be possible for you to move the fuel directly from the MPC up on the refueling floor before you flood it into the reactor?
No. You got to be flooded. We cannot do any refueling operations until the cavity's flooded.
Well, but the cab would be flooded, could be flooded. If the MPC was up on the refueling floor, still on the LPT.
And we have pictures that show this in a proprietary report, so that might be easier to see the picture there about how this would evolve. Yeah.
Could be an option for your first core load, perhaps, to your description. It could be done that way, perhaps.
Well, so I'll see what the pictures look like. Pictures worth 1,000 words, right?
Yeah, it would help to describe this, because on a refueling floor, we would only have the puller crane. We wouldn't have the refueling bridge capable of picking up the individual cells and putting them into the pool.
That's right.
And yeah, I'll explain that again in the next section too. I'll continue ahead. I don't see any more hands raised. So for the spent fuel pool management, right, pretty typical. So once there's been sufficient time for decay, spent fuel will be transferred to the MPC in the spent fuel pool, lifted onto the LPT on the containment rails. The difference here, some other plants do this as well. It will be moved into the RAB to continue the dry cask operations instead of performing it right outside as soon as it's landed. So we'll have systems in place to continue the cooling and perform the dry out dehydration within the RAB. From there, it'll be transferred to the independent spent fuel storage installation as feed pad, the UMAX. The MPC will be used to transfer the new fuel from the spent fuel pool, and then spent fuel decay. I know there was something said earlier about some of the assumptions used for the spent fuel decay rates. So spent fuel pool was based on 0.3% rated thermal power with the average burnup of 60 gigawatt days per MTU, which was a nominal peaking value. All of our fuel is less than this on the average burnup. And then their calculations use further assumptions such as lower enriched fuel assemblies for a larger conservative value. And then decay heat curves were performed using our internal scale program that's been used for the industry. Yes, I see question. Yes.
Okay. Kent, you want to go ahead, or I will start?
Go on, Dion.
Oh yeah. Oh, thank you. This is Andy again. It's just just a quick question. What would be the maximum enrichment do you plan to use?
Less than 5% right now. We're still designing our core, but we intend to be in less than 5% enrichment.
5%. All right.
Less
than. All right. Okay. I probably have some follow-up question later on. Yeah.
Sure thing. Okay.
This is Ken again. So the spent fuel decay heat, what is that based on again? Because 0.3% sounds kind of low.
Yep, so it's based off our actual fuel enrichment, power density, and normal power operation. And then with the 60 gigawatt days per MTU, the 0.3% was part of one of the calculations in the spent fuel pool. I do not have that information exactly how it was used.
If I was along, it's based on the time that it takes for that amount of exposed fuel to be decay off and then placed in the spent fuel pool rack. So that's our assumption.
No, I don't think so. The 0.3% used to be a formulation that used to have the ANSI standard for calculating decay heat, but we moved on completely with a scale package, computing the fuel assembly decay heat, assuming a single burnup of 60 gigawatt days that bounds every single assembly, and then just doing the arithmetic of how many assemblies do we have in a spent fuel pool, and factor in some decay time, like 48 hours, assuming the assemblies move to spent fuel pool. But the 0.3%, I don't think the 0.3% now is part of our equation. That used to be an
Okay, all right, thank you, Fazil.
Yeah.
Okay, so we went away from 0.3. Like you said, we're doing a specific calculation by bundle with a specific time period. Okay. Not doing a blanket 0.3.
That should answer Ken's question, or at least clarify it now.
Okay, thanks, Fazil.
Yeah, thank you. Ken, did that answer your question?
I'll ask it again when we get into the proprietary section, because I think we're in danger of going into that area.
Okay. We'll continue. So questions we have for the refueling section. So after the MPC is lowered into the spent fuel pool, can the new fuel remain in the MPC until the core is reloaded? So I think we kind of talked about this. MPC really just becomes a fuel storage rack, or a wet storage rack. And as of right now, it would only be the fresh fuel. The second part to this, in order to minimize the critical path for the outage, can spent fuel assemblies allocated for the dry gas storage be transferred to the MPC as the new fuel is transferred to the spent fuel pool rack. So in order to minimize those assemblies, right, if we're bringing 19 assemblies in the MPC 37, so there are a few empty locations in the MPC, would we be able to kind of do a one-for-one swap where you put one of the new fuel assemblies in the spent fuel pool and then a spent fuel assembly into the MPC, knowing that there would be, of course, calculations for criticality and such, but then that canister would have both spent and new fuel similar to the spent fuel pool or the spent fuel pool rack that you normally put the new fuel in. Yes, Ken?
Well, the answer to the second one is the same answer as the first. Right? It's just, well, it's in there. It's essentially just a wet storage rack.
Yep.
And it's going to have to meet, it would have to meet the 5068 criticality requirements as far as I can tell. I mean, just as if it was a temporary rack, just like the new fuel.
Okay, yeah, that's what we were thinking. We just wanted to raise it since it is a little bit unique to have kind of a temporary rack in a spent fuel pool, just to bring it forward in this discussion. So thank you.
Actually, you would be the first people with a temporary storage rack.
Yeah, that's why we're raising it.
I don't remember who it is, but somebody's already got one.
Lot of spent fuel pools have temporary racks during the outage. Yeah, it's not unusual. Yeah, but it would be the question: at what point in time do you switch over the MPC from part 50 to part 72? No? That would be then probably a little bit later before you take it out. No?
Yeah, that's a question too, Anton. You're right there. It's like at some point, if you got a mixed loading in there. Presumably it has to meet, it'll be 5068 at some point. Yes. Then when it's no longer a mixed loading, but then, there could be deciding when is something would have to be part of the package, I guess. Deciding when you change over from, part 50 to part 72 for loading and removing spent fuel assemblies.
Yep, I would presume that as long as you still have, if you have a mix, as long as you still have fresh fuel in there, you would have to stay in part 50, even if you replace some of the fresh fuel assemblies with spent fuel assemblies. But then once they're all spent fuel assemblies, then you probably can flick the licensing switch and say now it's part 72.
Yeah. Probably. Not sure that there might be the line of demarcation may be a little grayer than that. There might be a point where you still are in part 50 before you flip that switch. But I mean,
yeah.
I mean, so it's like certainly, I don't think you go to part 72 if you have a fresh fuel assembly in there.
That's probably correct, because I think part 72 doesn't allow that. So you have to wait until all your fresh fuel is out before you can flip that switch. Yeah.
But I don't know that you could flip that switch as soon as that last fresh is out. That's, I mean,
we'll see. We'll see. I think you can, but we have a very close look to make sure that we don't have some kind of an issue there.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess from my understanding, would there be an issue just maintaining it under Part 50 until we're ready to start the dry cast campaign operations, and then declare Part 72 if you need to swap licensing declarations? There shouldn't be an issue of extending the one, right, until you're ready to move it out of the pool? Okay.
Yeah. This is kind of, I'm not sure I heard you correctly, but I think once you try to move that with fuel in it, I don't think you want to be in Part 50.
Right. Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So.
We only agree. Yep.
Then we have to answer a bunch of Part 50. And then we get into all that stuff that we had to do. If you're not moving the MPC with fuel in it under Part 50, then I'm sorry, with spent fuel in it to take it out, then we probably get away with not looking at the things that we did for the Indian Point aren't a concern. But if you move it with fuel in it, then it will be. Well, especially while there's water in it.
Okay.
So that, when you're moving the fresh fuel, it's going to be a concern, but perhaps it's a smaller concern because it's fresh and not irradiated. But then when you're trying to move it with irradiated fuel in it, I understand you guys already have that's already an option under the Part 72 license. And if you can avoid having to do that under Part 50, it would probably save a lot of work.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we're in alignment. Thank you.
Yeah. Good comment. We'll yep.
John, do you have a question?
Yeah, I think we pretty much covered, and really have to think about which part, where's the demarcation between Part 50 and the Part 72. Apparently, when you have a fresh fuel mix with the spent fuel, that's something create a very unique situation. It's something you may think about that.
Well, we would have that in the spent fuel pool. So at that point in time, it has to be Part 50.
But typically in the spent fuel pool, you separate the fresh fuel from spent fuel.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily.
They're adjacent. Yeah, they're typically adjacent.
There are spent fuel racks in the industry where they're right next to each other.
Yeah, but the MPCs as is now is not licensed for that purpose.
That is correct.
Yeah, so
it needs to be licensed under Part 50. Yep.
Yeah, you need to think about that. That's really
yep.
Yeah.
Okay. I believe that brings us to the end of this presentation. So unless there are any further comments from our side, then I can turn it back over to the NRC before going to the next section. But yeah, Ken?
Okay, thank you. So at this point, let me open it up to are there any members of the public that would like to ask any questions or comments? Okay, hearing none. I move that we close this session and move on to the closed portion. Any objections?
Okay, great. We'll see you there.
Thanks, man.
Okay. Give us about 2 or 3 minutes to get on the other side.
Thank you.